For more than a century, we've trusted a money system we barely understand. But behind every digital number, every loan, every printed bill, lies a truth almost no one is supposed to see. This is the story of how real money disappeared and what replaced it.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into something that, everyone uses every single day, but
And almost no one truly understands. Not really.
exactly, money. We're going to be tearing apart this idea of the gold standard,
And then we're going to look at the reality of the money system we all live in right now.
which is, well, it's a surprising debt-based system.
It is. I'd argue it's probably the most important economic topic that you just don't find in a standard curriculum. Our mission today is pretty direct.
Yeah.
We need to really understand the core difference between currency that is backed by an asset,
Something real, something physical.
right, something finite,
Yeah.
and the modern system, which is based almost entirely on credit, on debt.
We've put together a set of sources that they trace this really fascinating and sometimes, frankly, chaotic history of monetary policy. We're going to look at these periods of financial stability that, they seem almost impossible from today's perspective.
And then we'll follow the chain of decisions that got us to where we are.
And the main question for you, the listener, is actually pretty simple. How is the money in your bank account created? And does it even physically exist?
We're going to trace that journey from these self-correcting systems backed by silver and gold through the shift to what we call fiat currency money that exists by government decree.
And then into the final stage, the dominance of what our German sources call Giralgeld.
Or book money, virtual money.
And the payoff for you is getting to the heart of how these decisions, mostly from the last century, created a system where, and this number is just staggering,
It really is.
an astonishing 93% of the money you use every day, your paycheck, your mortgage, it isn't created by a government printing press.
No, it's created by a bookkeeper's entry based entirely on debt.
This is all about being truly informed about the hidden engine driving our entire economy.
So let's get into it. Let's start where stability actually reigned.
Yeah, let's look at the historical lessons that taught us why value had to be tied to scarcity. So the sources, they lay out this almost brutal cycle.
Yeah, it's a repeating pattern throughout history.
Monetary chaos and political chaos, they aren't separate things, are they? They're linked.
Inextricably. You look at the French Revolution and their paper money, the assignats,
Right.
total disaster.
Right. And then you see it again. Russia, China, hyperinflation during their revolution.
It's the same story. After every single one of these massive financial catastrophes, when a state basically destroys its own currency through reckless printing.
Then what happens?
Well, for a brief moment, the system gets brought under control. They give money a stable foundation again.
But it doesn't last.
It doesn't, because political hubris always returns. The need to finance a war or some grand project.
Yeah.
And power gets handed right back to the people who benefit from unlimited credit.
Which leads right back to more economic destruction. It's like financial amnesia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what was the insight that finally broke that cycle, even if only for a while?
What was the solution?
The realization was that if you want lasting financial security, which is really the foundation for social and political peace, you have to bind paper money to true values.
Meaning the people printing the money have to be constrained. They can't just do whatever they want.
They have to be constrained by an external reality.
Yeah.
Every piece of paper has to represent something real that can't just be multiplied on a whim.
And that's where we get the silver standard.
That was the first step, yes. The system basically mandated that a country could only issue as much paper and coin as it held in actual physical silver.
It's a hard limit.
A hard limit. It forces fiscal accountability.
And from silver, we gradually moved to gold. Was that just because gold is rarer, or?
Rarity was a huge part of it, yes, but also its density. You can store a massive amount of value in a very small, secure volume.
So it's just more practical.
Much more practical for large-scale international trade. Now, the implementation varied a lot from country to country. Some used both, some were strictly gold.
But the principle was the same.
The underlying principle never changed. The money supply was constrained by scarcity. #B, defining and analyzing the gold standard mechanism. And to give this a really precise definition, we can just look at the German Empire's gold standard. It's a classic case.
Okay.
Their currency, the gold mark, it was defined with absolute mathematical clarity.
Oh, so?
2,790 gold marks was equal to the value of exactly 1 kilogram of fine gold. period.
Wow. It's not a suggestion, it's a physical conversion, right?
It's a non-negotiable relationship. That's what gives it intrinsic value.
And that certainty, that mathematical bedrock, is what allowed for that period of stability that followed. The sources called the period from 1800 to 1914, so right up until World War I, the most economically stable period in all of recorded history.
Think about that. The most stable ever. To get that, the mechanism had to be incredibly robust.
So how did it work? What made it so robust?
It was robust because it was automatic. It didn't rely on politicians making good decisions.
It was an anti-bubble machine.
That's a great way to put it. Because gold is scarce, it's finite, governments were physically unable to just invent more money when they felt like it.
So if you only had 100 tons of gold in your vaults,
Then you knew exactly how much currency you could issue, and that was it. You were forced to budget reasonably.
because if you didn't, the system would punish you.
Instantly.
So it's not just a reserve, it's a performance mandate on the entire government.
That's it, exactly. If a country wanted to spend more, maybe build a huge new railway system or, fund an army.
You couldn't just turn on the printing press.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
They had to perform better economically. They had to achieve a genuine trade surplus.
Meaning they had to sell more stuff to other countries than they bought.
Yes, they had to physically acquire the limited supply of gold from other nations through real trade and real productivity.
So economic competition was tied to actual performance, not just, financial engineering.
Right. And that makes the flow of gold the ultimate judge of a nation's economic health.
If your policies were sound, gold flowed in. If they were reckless, gold flowed out. Simple as that. Hashtag C. Automatic correction and fractional reserves.
And that mechanism you just described, that's what the sources call the great merit of the gold standard.
The automatic correction.
The automatic correction.
Yeah.
If a government started living beyond its means, running up huge debts, for instance,
Those debts had to be settled.
and because the currency was exchangeable for gold, creditors in other countries wouldn't take your shaky paper. They'd say,
Give me the gold!
give me the gold. So gold would automatically flow out of that poorly managed country. It was an immediate, painful consequence for fiscal irresponsibility.
And the gold would only come back when?
Only when that government returned to sound financial policies and restored trust. The system was self-policing because the pain of losing your gold reserves was tangible and immediate.
I can see why anyone who wanted centralized control over money would absolutely hate this.
It forces an inconvenient truth on them instantly. And that pressure, that forced discipline, is why someone like the economist Friedrich August von Hayek made such a powerful statement.
What did he say?
He said, and I'm quoting here, "With the exception of the times of the gold standard, practically all governments in history have used their exclusive right to issue money to deceive and plunder the people."
Wow, that's a sweeping indictment.
It is. He's basically accusing governments throughout history of systemic abuse, with the gold standard being the one time they couldn't get away with it.
And the data seems to back up the stability part, at least.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the U.S. for the 34 years it was on the standard, from 1879 to 1913.
Okay.
Over that entire generation, U.S. consumer prices fluctuated by only 17%. Total.
So basically zero average inflation.
Year zero. You could put $1 under your mattress in 1880 and have pretty much the same purchasing power in 1910. That kind of predictability is just, it's unthinkable today.
Now, let's get into a key detail here, because this can be confusing. It wasn't 100% backed by gold, was it?
No, and that's a crucial point. It was a fractional reserve system, even then.
So how did that work without everything just collapsing?
Strict legal constraints. There was a defined minimum coverage, and it was typically 1/3.
1/3. So if the central bank had a kilogram of gold,
it could issue paper money equivalent to the value of 3 kilograms.
right,
One part was backed by the physical gold.
and the other two parts were essentially a promise, credit.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you had $100 million in gold, you could issue $300 million in currency. But why a third? Why not half or a tenth?
The 1/3 rule was sort of.
Mm-hmm.
It was determined by historical experience to be the right psychological and financial buffer.
I see.
It allowed enough liquidity for commerce because, not everyone is going to demand their gold at the exact same time. But it kept the leverage tightly capped.
The central bank could grant the other 2/3 as credit, but they could never, ever go beyond that ratio.
Never. If they did, it would be catastrophic and immediate. A lack of gold coverage would be discovered, or even just suspected, and that would trigger a bank run, a default. The national currency would be devalued instantly.
So it was a safety valve, but one enforced by the market itself, not just by a regulator.
Right. It was leveraged, yes, but that leverage was capped by scarcity and the very real, very immediate threat of total failure.
A fixed limit with immediate consequences. That is a fundamentally different world from the one we live in now.
So you have this incredibly stable system, but it faced powerful opposition.
And that opposition came from where?
Almost entirely from within the financial industry. The bankers.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it. The gold standard was basically a set of handcuffs on their profits.
A literal handcuff.
Yeah.
Credit issuance was limited by those physical gold reserves.
So the money supply is capped.
And if the money supply is capped, the volume of loans you can make is capped. And if the volume of loans is capped, your interest income is capped.
They couldn't get the kind of exponential growth they wanted.
Exactly. The stability that benefited, the average citizen and even governments through low inflation, that came at the cost of unlimited banking profits.
So they didn't see stability. They saw an impediment, a roadblock.
That's the heart of it. The financial analyst Ferdinand Lips, he pointed out that this system, it wasn't some grand design. It emerged naturally from centuries of experience. By 1900, pretty much every industrial nation was on it.
But the banks were fighting against it.
They were chafing against the constraints, actively looking for a way to get rid of the one thing that limited their ability to create money.
So the incentives were perfectly clear. Bankers wanted the gold standard gone, not because it was flawed,
But because it was limiting.
So this opposition, it needed some kind of cataclysm to actually succeed.
And it got one. A huge one. In 1914,
World War I.
World War I. This wasn't a philosophical choice anymore. This was about absolute, brutal, wartime financial necessity.
The governments just couldn't raise enough money through taxes, right?
Right.
And they couldn't get enough gold to finance a war on that scale.
Not even close. The war required immediate, massive spending that just blew past the limits imposed by their gold reserves.
So they temporarily suspended the gold standard.
Temporarily, in quotes.
Yeah.
What that meant was the fundamental promise was broken. You could no longer walk into a bank and exchange your paper money for gold.
And that one act opened Pandora's box.
It did, because by removing the gold backing, governments could now print unlimited slips of paper, totally unconstrained by any real value.
And citizens were forced to accept this new uncovered paper.
By state decree. It became legal tender by force. But here's the really crucial part.
What's that?
The state didn't just print this money for free.
No.
No, because many of the central banks, especially in the West, were privately owned, controlled by a handful of powerful bankers. So the states had to borrow from those private banks to create the new money.
Wait, hold on. Let's make sure we get that. The government decided to abandon gold, but to print the new paper money, they had to go into debt to private banks?
Precisely. They issued government bonds backed by the future taxes on their citizens and gave them to the central banks. The banks then created the currency.
Which is why the sources say so bluntly that war is the best thing that can happen to a bank.
It creates an immediate, massive, debt-fueled expansion of the money supply. And the creditors who facilitate it get incredibly wealthy. The war forced states into astronomical debt at the very same moment they broke the promise of sound money. ###C, the era of fiat money.
And the result of that suspension was the birth of what we now call fiat money.
From the Latin, fiat, let it be done. Money by declaration.
Money because the government says it's money, not because it's backed by anything. The sources call it Scheingeld.
Illusory money.
And after 1914, the whole world basically switched to this system.
Almost exclusively. And, there were some attempts to go back. Even the Bretton Woods system after World War II is a sort of pale imitation.
But the full gold standard never returned.
Never.
Why do you think that is? Was it just that people got used to paying with, this worthless money?
That's part of it, inertia. But the bigger reason is that governments realized they had gained this unprecedented freedom.
The freedom to spend without consequence.
Without immediate consequence, yes. The ability to fund things without having to ask the taxpayers first. Once you have that power, it's almost impossible to give it up.
And the financial system got a taste of unlimited leverage.
And they weren't going to let that go.
And in the process, we lost all that stability.
We did. Think about what Lips said. Prices were stable for 50 years before the war. Your purchasing power held for generations.
And the moment that restraint was removed,
the inflationary process began. The constant slow erosion of your savings and your wages. And it has never really stopped since.
The abandonment of gold wasn't philosophical. It was purely pragmatic. Finance the war and get rid of the constraint.
Exactly. And once that physical constraint was gone, The financial system was ready for the next great abstraction.
Money that wasn't even paper.
So this shift from physical cash to just entries in a ledger, it's not actually a new idea.
Right, this concept of boekgeld, or book money, it goes way back.
All the way back to the Bank of Amsterdam around 1609.
But they were really cautious at first, weren't they? They had full physical coverage for everything.
They did. A banknote back then was really just a claim ticket, a receipt for the actual coins you deposited in their vault for safekeeping.
That's what a sight deposit is, right? A sick time login.
Exactly. It means you have the right to claim your physical assets on site instantly.
But carrying around big bags of gold or even just lots of paper notes, it's inconvenient.
And risky. So traders started looking for an easier way, and they realized they could just transfer the bookkeeping function entirely to the banks.
So instead of two merchants meeting and physically exchanging gold,
They just sent a note to the bank authorizing them to adjust their ledgers.
take X amount out of my account, put it into his.
A simple, efficient transfer. Required a huge amount of trust in the bank, of course, and you paid fees for the service.
And the check was basically a physical instruction to do that digital transfer.
Yeah. Sort of hybrid, yes. But the real revolution, the game changer, was when this whole bookkeeping system merged with computers.
That's when book money becomes what we now call virtual money, or account money.
Precisely. The digital network allowed for massive high-speed transfers, direct debits, standing orders, things that would have been impossible with paper.
And the transactions became more and more impersonal.
Which was great for convenience, but a massive structural advantage for the banks. It abstracted money even further away from anything you could actually touch or feel.
Yeah.
Hashtag tag tag BV. The stunning reality of modern money.
All right, we have to pause here because this next part, I think this is the real aha moment for anyone listening.
It's a staggering number.
The sources state that as of 2011, 93%.
93%.
Of all the money in circulation around the globe, it doesn't physically exist.
It's not paper. It's not coin. It's not gold. It consists solely of figures recorded on bank ledgers and transmitted through computer networks.
So when I tap my card at the store,
You're not spending money. You're transferring a debt-based virtual credit from your bank's ledger to the store's bank's ledger.
so if 93% is virtual, that means only 7%, the actual cash in our wallets, is real physical money. Why should we care about that?
Because of systemic risk. Because if 93% is just a promise, it means that when the next financial crisis hits, the banks might simply be unable to pay out because they don't have the money.
The numbers on my bank statement are an asset to me.
But they're a liability to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And their liabilities vastly, vastly outweigh their physical reserves.
We saw this panic in 2008. The German government came out and made this big declaration guaranteeing all deposits.
Yes.
That sounds good, but what was really going on there?
That was pure damage control. An act of psychological warfare to prevent a catastrophic bank run.
Because they knew if everyone tried to get their money out at once.
They would have quickly discovered that the numbers on their statements were an illusion. The physical funds were gone, lent out multiple times over.
So if I had gone to the ATM to pull out 10,000 euros, and my neighbor did the same, and 1,000 other people,
Only the first few people would have gotten any cash, the 7%. Everyone else would have learned a very hard lesson. The money they thought was theirs was just virtual.
the government's promise wasn't a guarantee that the money existed. It was a plea to maintain trust in a system they knew was fragile.
Exactly. That little 7% of physical cash is just a pressure release valve. It's the only real liquidity in a system built on a 93% digital promise. So that brings us to the core mechanism. How is that 93% of virtual money actually created?
There are two ways, right?
Two sources, yes. The first one is tiny. That's when you deposit your physical cash part of that 7% into your account.
But the massive, overwhelming source is credit creation.
It's whenever anyone borrows money from a bank. This is the part we have to understand completely.
Okay.
The bank grants a loan by inventing money that it does not possess.
It doesn't take another saver's money and lend it to me.
No. That is the great misconception. It doesn't need to have the funds because most people taking out a loan don't want a briefcase full of cash.
Right, I want the number of my account so I can buy a house or a car.
So the bank simply writes sum X on the credit contract, and then a banker literally types that same number into the computer, and your account balance goes up. Poof.
The money exists.
The money now exists, but only as a digital entry. A brand new sum of virtual money created out of thin air.
Wow.
At that moment, the bank creates an asset for itself. Your promise to repay with interest and a liability, the deposit entry in your account.
And that new virtual money then starts its life in the economy.
Exactly. That's the virtual multiplier effect. You transfer that sum to the person you bought the house from.
Who then pays their contractor, who pays their employees.
Right. And it changes hands dozens of times as virtual money, settling debts, buying goods, without a single piece of physical currency ever being involved.
The bank just has to approve the loan. That's the act of creation.
The simple act of accepting a credit contract brings the theoretical money to life, purely through bookkeeping.
The sources call this Geldschöpfen, money creation, and they describe it as making bankers godlike.
Well, it is an incredible power. The power to create the money supply, executed not by the state, but by a private company that profits from the act itself. #B, credit, collateral, and profit incentives.
Let's look at the actual exchange when I get a loan. Say a mortgage, I don't get the money, do I?
No, you never touch the principal. The bank pays it directly to the seller of the house.
And that's intentional.
Of course. It ensures the money immediately starts circulating, generating fees and interest for the bank from day one. And look at the incentives they build in.
You mean like default interest, the Verzugszinsen.
Exactly. They impose these harsh penalties if your building plans are delayed or something goes wrong.
So they create intense pressure on me to spend that invented money as fast as possible.
Which guarantees its circulation and speeds up their profit. The pressure is always, relentlessly on the borrower, the one paying interest on a sum that costs the bank nothing but a keystroke.
And that gets to the heart of the imbalance in this whole system, the exchange itself.
Yeah.
When I, the debtor, sign that contract, I have to provide real collateral. My house, my property, real assets.
This is the critical moment. The bank demands tangible, real-world security. But what does the bank provide in return?
It provides the numbers on the screen.
It provides no counter-performance in terms of existing value. Its action is limited to inventing the money. The bank risks nothing of its own on the principal amount.
So you, the listener, you have to weigh that exchange. Decades of my future labor to pay interest and my real house as collateral in exchange for numbers typed into a ledger.
It forces you to ask that fundamental question. Is this a fair and balanced business?
It forces you to see that the system is designed to transfer real value, your property, your future work, in exchange for virtual credit. So if I, the borrower, have to put up my house as security, the next logical question is, what security does the bank have to provide? What are their constraints?
And that brings us to the regulations, specifically the Basel Accords, which are the international banking rules. Before the 2007 crisis, we were mostly under Basel I.
Okay, and what did that say?
It required banks to hold 8% of the loan amount as their own capital.
So if a bank invented a €100 loan, it had to have 8 of its own money set aside to back that. It's small, but it's something.
It was a defined constraint, yes.
Yeah.
But here's where the accounting magic comes in.
Oh, I'm ready.
As the borrower, you don't pay back just the €100. You pay back the 100 plus interest, so let's say 200 total.
Right.
The bank was allowed to immediately record that entire future stream of payments, the full 200 jardo, as an asset on its books the moment you sign the contract.
Wait, they can book future profit, money that hasn't even been paid yet, as a current asset.
Yes, that's how it works. So the bank issued a €100 virtual loan, which required €8 capital, but they instantly recognized a 200 asset.
And that new 200 asset on their books, that becomes capital itself.
It becomes a basis to finance new loans, because if the reserve requirement is 8%, that 200 of newly recorded profit can be used to back 25 new euro loans.
Because 8 times 25 is 200.
Exactly. So the bank only needed its own capital for that very first loan. After that, the entire credit creation process finances itself through the promise of future debt repayment.
That is a perpetual motion machine, a perpetuum mobile.
It is. The source shows how that tiny initial euro can be leveraged and re-leveraged into billions. And this is why the goal of the system isn't just to have credit, but to encourage constant massive growth in credit.
The system requires everyone, people, companies, governments, to go deeper and deeper into debt forever.
Or the machine stops.
But that kind of hyper-leveraging has to create insane risk. If people stop borrowing, or if they start defaulting,
The whole thing collapses. The massive expansion of invented credit inflates bubbles in housing and stocks, whatever. The system generates these astronomical returns on almost no real capital until the inevitable wave of defaults hits that tiny reserve base and the bubble bursts.
and then there's a bailout, and the cycle starts again. Often with even looser rules. #tag BB. Decreasing oversight and systemic risk.
Which brings us to the post-2007 world. The regulations didn't get tighter, they got looser.
So Basel II, everything after that, it made things more vulnerable.
The rules were relaxed. Instead of a hard 8% rule, banks are now just recommended to hold a few percent. The regulations got more complex, which allowed banks to use their own internal risk models.
Which, surprise, usually resulted in them having to hold less capital.
Far less. The sources point to Deutsche Bank in 2008 having only 3% capital.
3 cents of their own money backing every euro of their liabilities.
That minuscule fraction just shows how fragile the whole thing is. The entire system is balanced on one thing: collective confidence.
And if that trust fades, and everyone tries to turn their virtual money into physical cash at the same time.
That 3% or even the 7% of physical cash in the whole system is completely inadequate. The danger is immense.
And this endless creation of new money through debt. It doesn't just enrich the banks, it has a direct consequence for everyone else.
Inflation. Every new unit of debt-based money that's created devalues all the existing money.
It's a hidden tax on savers.
It's been happening continuously since we've fully abandoned gold in the 1970s. A constant erosion of the value of your wages and your savings.
Which brings us to the last really critical point from the sources. This global push we're seeing now for a cashless society.
The next logical stage.
If 93% of money is already virtual, the only remaining obstacle for the system is that last 7%, the physical cash.
Abolish cash and you have absolute control. Cash is the only way to hold money outside of that virtual ledger system.
If it's gone, every single transaction can be tracked, taxed, and controlled. It removes the escape hatch.
You can't have a bank run because you can't demand physical money that no longer exists. All you can do is watch the numbers change on your screen.
It solidifies this system of perpetual debt.
It does. It creates, as the source says, more subjects who are only there to pay off fantasy debts with absolutely no way to opt out of the system. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, this has been an incredibly detailed look at everything. We've tracked money from this self-correcting system of physical scarcity under the gold standard
Where the money supply was finite.
to our current system of unlimited credit creation, where the only limit on the money supply is our collective willingness to go into more debt.
And the central takeaway, the one thing you have to remember, is that 93% statistic.
Right.
The vast majority of the money you think you have isn't a real asset. It is a number created as credit by a highly leveraged private institution that needs you to be in debt for it to survive.
The conflict couldn't be more stark. The stable system was abandoned because it constrained profits and political ambition.
And the debt-based system we have now, it thrives on instability. It requires constant exponential growth, which means bubbles and ever-increasing debt.
You know, to understand why this system is so resilient, it's worth looking at that old quote, the one attributed to the Rothschilds back in 1863. The idea was that the general public will be so focused on their day-to-day profits or so dependent on the debt system that they'll never organize to oppose it.
That the masses, being mentally unable to really comprehend how it all works, will just bear the burden without complaint, never suspecting the system itself is hostile to their interests.
That lack of comprehension, it's the system's greatest defense.
And we had to end on that one critical legal point from the sources. Virtual money, book money, is not legal tender.
Unlike cash.
Unlike physical cash, there is no law that forces anyone to accept it. We all do, based on trust. But that means your bank balance is essentially a private IOU from the bank. It is not a state-backed asset.
And in a major crisis, when that trust disappears, that distinction becomes everything.
Everything.
So, the entire engine of our economy is built on creating money as credit. And to keep it running, it needs to incentivize more and more debt.
It's a cycle, a perpetual one.
So you have to ask yourself, what does that cyclical connection between money creation and personal debt ultimately mean for the future of our society?
Are we now permanently tied to this state of collective, perpetual indebtedness? And what happens when that final physical constraint cash is removed?
That's the question we'll leave you to explore.